talking about underrated prospects, I'm going to present a few names as we go. James has brought along a few of the names that he is going to put as qualifiers for underrated prospect. And the first one up is a fascinating name, someone that we watched really for quite a long time, and I got to see during Instructs this past year, finally, after missing him for quite some time. Cam Collier, only 20 years old when he had come in. He had actually been a reclassified prospect. I think a lot of people forget that. So he's been in here for 3 years now, but only 20 years old. And I think he's going to be, it looks like, he just hit that as well. So 20 homers this past year, 248 batting average, not much on the stolen base market. You're seeing the extra base hits. He was able to turn those extra base hits into more power. He had this really good streak going for some period of time this past year. He had a month or two where he was really hot and kind of tapered down. Break down why Collier kind of fits this mold, because I thought this was a super fascinating one, because I think there's like post-hype sleeper in him. There's some people that are very worried still about his body. His body didn't look fantastic when I saw him recently, but we might be moving past like that being a big major focus of what the bat is, because the bat really has a chance to be top notch. So talk to us about why Cam Collier is underrated.
Yeah, well, 19-year-old who finished his run at high A incredibly strong. Over his final 65 games, he had a 404 OBP, a 17% walk rate, and a 23% strikeout rate, and hit 10 homers in those 65 games. Again, as a 19-year-old at high A, very impressive stuff. I think people should be comparing Cam Collier to the best first base prospects in the game, and just sort of, because that's sort of where the body is, that's where the power projection is, and maybe he ends up at third base. They've kept him there so far, but I'm kind of viewing Collier as a future first baseman. And if you just kind of look at his hit tool compared to Xavier Isaac, I think there's a pretty good case for Collier, and the power is obviously part of the appeal. I think that's in that park. He's going to have all fields power, could be a 30 homer guy annually, and just really, really impressive strides as a pure hitter and OBP guy. So it's a pretty weak prospect class. I'll probably have Cam Collier as a top 30 prospect on my next update. So I think it's a good
top what did you say? A top 130?
No.
Top 30 overall prospect. Yeah. Oh, okay.
So
right, that's huge with Collier. I like the Xavier Isaac comp with it too, because I always wanted to be really high on Isaac, and I kind of stayed there for a while. And then, I ended up getting to see him obviously in the AFL live. First thing that stood out was how he had transformed his body, because there was a time where Isaac was a little Cam Collier, body kind of had a similar representation. It was like, which direction is this going to go? He's really thinned out. I don't remember if by the time you got here, if he was already gone, because he ended up leaving, I know, about a week or so before. And then he hadn't played the week really prior. Did you get to see him?
Yeah, I got to see Isaac. Yeah.
Okay, I just couldn't remember.
Great body for his size. Good athlete for his size.
But you start to see some of the holes. And, he does struggle versus lefties, which Collier also has. You saw some of the limitations as far as the bat goes. Very, very chase heavy, which I don't think is quite there with Collier, but as showing on here in Dayton, he'd only hit 174 against lefties. So, some of that struggle is still there with Cam Collier, but top 30 is pretty big. I'm with there's an age to levelness. The ballpark is huge. This is a good representation of an underrated prospect if you've got him that high, because I would bet you most people don't have him in that range. Though I will say I'm in your camp, because I felt like, and you tell me if I'm incorrect here, I felt like there was a time where a lot of people had given up on Collier and were not interested. And maybe I'm wrong, and maybe people kept on him. I don't look at everyone's prospect list. I've kept him. I never let him leave really outside that top 100, always right in that vicinity. But I felt like there was a time where people pushed him out. You definitely have jumped past me on this, but do you think like that's kind of the existence of where he falls in here. I mean, it's a very good hyper aggressive rank of him, but I felt like people maybe had pushed him outside of like maybe even their maybe not quite their total rank list, but probably like top 200. Or am I making that up?
I think you're probably right on that. For me, I just kind of wanted to see how the game power would develop. There were some questions about his bat path and just whether he's going to hit too many ground balls. And he kind of showed me what I wanted to see last year. So it's probably more about how bad I think the prospects are kind of outside of the top 15 or so that has Collier pushing top 30 for me. But, if I can find a position player that I believe in, that's just, there aren't that many of them out there. And he definitely is one. And I think if he ends up at first base, all the better, because I think it's just an incredibly shallow position and really tough to find like your first baseman of the future in a dynasty league. So
that's a good point. And he's got the pop that can stay there. Sometimes you have these guys that are moving around and it's like, no, I don't want him here. Who do you have higher, Collier or Isaac?
On my current rankings that are on the site, I have Isaac higher, but I will have Collier higher on the update that I'll be releasing in a couple weeks.
Okay, so that's a pretty big one there. Number 2 is another red that you're throwing in here, Sal Stewart. And it's just funny because like one of the days I was at Reds during Instructs, like I saw both of these guys. Collier was out here. It was funny. Collier had like arrived late and he was running, or I don't know if he was late, but it's all practices and stuff. Drove up, gets in, dresses, gets out to a game he's playing in. And then you got Sal Stewart, who was rehabbing. You had also had Christian Encarnacion Strand, Edwin Arroyo. I mean, it was like a superstar pack of guys that were at Instructs, and Sal Stewart had obviously missed some time this past year, but 279 average, 8 homers, surprising 10 stolen bases. He's a big boy. He's a big boy when you get him out there and you see him. Was even a little surprised. Looks like, I don't want to say like packed it on, but it's like he's a big dude. Like his stat line, or as far as like, his height, weight, I don't think quite give out to it. But, 3-year career, 12 homers the prior year, 20 career homers. He's got it's like 205 games, so it's a little over a full season. The power hasn't quite developed. He's had very surprising speed, but also 138 walks to 139 strikeouts, an incredibly impressive number. Another high OBP, guys. So Sal Stewart versus Cam Collier. Let's talk about Stewart.
Yeah, I'll have Collier, 20 spots probably higher on my rankings, but I think I've mentioned Stewart on your podcast before, but I believe in the bat 100%. Like I think he's going to be an everyday player, and I think it's just a question of how much power he gets to, whether he's a 20 homer guy or a 30 homer guy. I'm not factoring in the steals at all, really. Like he always just logs OBPs close to 400, and if you do that and you're at high A, you should be able to steal some bases. But I'm factoring him in as like a 0 in the speed department. So it's just, I love the average. I love the power. I love the OBP. And I love the fact that he's not going to need a platoon. He split time this past year at second base, third base. I think he probably ends up at second base. Maybe he moves between the two spots depending on who's performing for the big club. And he did have wrist surgery. So he might get off to a slower start at the beginning of 2025, just coming back from that wrist procedure. But I just think he's just about as safe of a prospect as you'll find outside of top 20s, and debatable on the long-term power potential. But I just think he's one of these years, if it's not this year, maybe the year after, he will take a big step forward as a power hitter. But even if he doesn't, just a 20 homer, high average, high OBP guy, I think that's got plenty of value.
What do you sorry, and I went out there a little bit. When ranking him out, Sal Stewart or Moises Ballesteros?
Stewart. Yeah,
by a wide margin.
Yeah, by a wide margin. have no idea what Ballesteros' future is with position, playing time. Like he's just got such a weird body, and I have no, like, I'm not a guy that's going to be grading someone's catcher defense, but you'll struggle to find anyone who thinks he is a good defensive catcher. And then it's like, is he a DH? Are they going to actually give him everyday run as a DH? Are they going to give him run at first base? So just too many questions with Ballesteros for me. I feel much more secure in what I have in Sal Stewart.
How about Stewart versus Davison De Los Santos?
Yeah, Stewart pretty easily for me there too.
Pretty easy. Okay.
I think Stewart might be a 55 or 60 grade hitter, and I think De Los Santos is like a 40 grade hitter.
Yeah, I mean the like the power versus the hit tool is the question with De Los Santos. Like De Los Santos' power, I think, is unquestioned. It's a matter of like, can he ever tap into it? Like, and I think to your point, what you would worry about is that like De Los Santos is like a Max Muncy type of player, probably without the OBP. That's probably a bad comp to Stewart being maybe more like a Tristan Casas type of player, you know, a guy that you can hit for average pretty consistently, higher OBP, and then is going to be able to tap into the power number. So I kind of get where you're going with that, with Sal Stewart. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, I'm always going to go for the hit tool over the power when I see the gap being that big.
Jonathan Rodriguez is another name that you put up here. Let's hear the underrated. This is a really good one. I mean, I think Sal Stewart and Cam Collier has been in a lot of people's minds. This is a deeper play. Curious to see where you've ended up pushing him. So hit us with Jonathan Rodriguez.
Yeah, so it's a theme with the position players that I mentioned is none of these guys are guys I expect to run much. And I just think it's really hard to actually be underrated if you have 5 category potential. Like guys that can run, guys that are good athletes, that show good hit tools and good power. Those guys just aren't underrated. Rodriguez is another, just power first, no speed, corner bat, might get strong side platoon, but I believe in the power. I think he will do enough with the power, the OBP, to be a guy that gets 500 plate appearances a year. And I think he's fine in right field. So he's kind of like a Matt Wallner type to me, where I just think he's not sexy at all. Like when we do like your P1 ADP mocks, I think I probably got Rodriguez with my last pick or something like that, just because nobody's taking the like power guy where it's questionable on the hit tool, who's close to the majors. Like there's just nothing sexy about him, but I think he could be playing a ton as early as this year and hitting for power. So, we all need guys like this as our 4th or 5th outfielder in dynasty leagues, and he's extremely cheap right now. I'm gonna have him like borderline top 100.
A borderline top 100. I was about to say, this also sounds like a guy that you're probably tagging in like NFBC leagues. Am I right?
I've got a lot of Rodriguez in NFBC leagues.
Yeah, that's the other thing people forget with James. James is like such an accomplished prospect person, but an accomplished like higher stakes guy. Like I was actually probably hit you up to do a high stakes thing on Fantasy Pros too, because you've been doing like NFBC and all those type of leagues for a long time, and this the strategies are different. I burned myself this year I actually went a little too hard on some of the upside potential as my depth, and that killed me when I lost my starters. And like I hit in a few spots. I had my shares of Jared Jones was a big hit that I had this year in quite a few NFBC leagues, but I missed in some of those spots, A, on taking too much upside, and B, taking these shots on players that I thought could get called up. And where I'm going with this is like, there are the higher ranked, and this is, I guess I'm doing a little NFBC, but like there's those higher ranked players that you're like, they might have a shot to get to the majors. And then there's those players that it's like, they may be not as sexy, but there's going to be time in the near future. Last year, that was kind of like a chasing DeLauder, did not end up panning out and working out with the injuries, where Rodriguez is one of those guys that, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting perspective of like, it's a power hitter that is probably going to get some playing time and things might work out. And it probably, I guess, also speaks to, I don't know, your kind of concern, or there's a better word that I'm not coming up with, of like what the hitting prospects are outside of the top 15, your pessimism, I guess, with hitting prospects in general, that Was it fair to say that maybe you're speculating less than you have in the past and you're just kind of going with what you know? Is that like a fair assessment? Maybe I didn't say it correctly.
Yeah. I mean, it's, always chasing value where I think it is, but yeah, I think like your P1 ADP Mox is a great example of that. Like a lot of the times in those, I just gravitate towards the guys that are close to the majors where, they're not perfect prospects, but they're really close to contributing, if not like going to contribute on opening day. And I just think that's where the value is a lot of the times, versus the, extremely exciting toolsy guys. You kind of got to get in on the ground floor with those types, and you got to get them in your FYPDs. But if we're just talking about picking up guys, if we're doing like a startup dynasty draft, like I'm going for the proximity guys usually, just because I think that they're devalued in my mind relative to some of the toolsier guys who are further away. Like you need those guys, but you have to get them in your FYPDs basically.
I've always felt too, there's such a discrepancy in how we have to talk about prospects between what you're doing. And there's such a different market gap of like, if you're looking at a list and you're in a league where, you're just looking to trade, or you're in a league where you can pick up free agents, prospects, how big it is, and then are you starting fresh? And what I mean by that is like, we can talk about prospects specifically, like what you're saying. You can talk about prospects that you're into, or not into is a better example, that you're not into, but that's more from I don't want to pay their current market cost of what I have to buy them for. But if you're in a restart or a fresh new dynasty league and you're drafting and you can have just free equity, then that can change your perception on a prospect. And same thing, you with a couple of these guys knowing that you're higher on like Cam Collier and Sal Stewart, that's one of those things where it's like, I want those. I want to understand the market might not be as high, and I don't want to take them quite at that value, knowing I can get them a little bit later versus like wanting to buy them at their cost in a already started up dynasty. Like those values can change, which is really interesting. I'm going to throw two guys at you. Neither one of these are unknown players by any means. They're not insanely underrated. But my point back to what I opened up with of saying that the perception of how we speak about players and how people are talking about them maybe throws a few of these guys in as underrated. And the first guy is Angel Genoa with the Guardians. They've got quite a few players. People know the name. He's really risen up. This is another 20-year-old bat that we're talking about. 10 homers, 25 stolen bases, a 330 average this past year, higher OBP. There's a lot of qualities of like, this is like a classic Guardians type of player. The power took an uptick this past year. He has, he's kind of done the trajectory. He's done the ladder of what you've wanted from, Dominican into the rookie leagues, into A-ball. He hit over 300 across both levels this past year. He went to A and high A, 380, 341 and 322. Power ticking up, their stolen bases. You saw those counting stats just kind of take that big jump. And also just from, the underlying stuff, just making solid, consistent contact, a little bit harder hit than you would expect, a little bit of a smaller guy. I think he's floated in a lot of people's top 100s, but I also think there's some scenarios where people, maybe only be putting him there statistically and maybe not understanding that there's this just really great hit tool behind it. What do you think? What do you think about Angel Genoa being an underrated prospect? Do you think he truly is? And do you think he belongs in that conversation, positively or negatively?
Well, I've got him as like a borderline top 75 guy. So I don't know if that makes me like high or low on him. But I like him. I think he could be underrated. I think this is just a massive, like seeing how he does against AA pitching. Like I just want to see where the power is at because, I like Brian Rocchio, for instance, someone that I was too high on as a prospect, and I kind of got suckered into his power output at lower levels and just sort of projecting, thinking like, well, look at this ISO he had at high A. Like, he's this young and he's probably going to be a 15, 20 homer guy, at least by the time he gets to the big leagues. But sometimes guys just get into those hitters counts at really low levels, and then they just swing for the fences when they know they're getting a fastball. And that just accounts for all of their power. And then they get up to a level where guys can actually throw their off-speed stuff for strikes, and they can't really get by on that as much and just get to all their power in these advantage counts. And so I just want to see how that translates at AA before pushing him into the top 50. But I think he's got an incredibly high floor. I think worst case scenario, he's basically Brian Rocchio. And I think Rocchio is a mixed league player this year. So really high floor. I don't know where he ends up defensively, but I think he can play any of those spots as needed: shortstop, second, third. Definitely going to chip in some steals. So I love the hit tool. I think it's just a question of, is he like a Andres Jimenez type, or can he actually get to like 20 homer power consistently against big league pitching?
And that's a scary one right there, because Jimenez is another one of those. And the Guardians, like, that's been like the joke for a long time. They just breed out these shortstops. It's like they get the same type of player over and over. And Jimenez and Rocchio both really, Jimenez has like worked. He's been viable for fantasy and significant stolen bases and stuff like that. But I think a lot of what you spoke to is actually why he does sit in that underrated territory. I think you want to see him do it again, and there's a waiting period. But floor sometimes also screams underrated to me, because I think we overrate the upside while playing down or maybe it's the opposite. We overplay, the upside of it, and we forget about that floor. And I think that's what Genoa has. That hit tool is phenomenal. And he did not only, increase that power output, but also increase the double output. 38 doubles this past year to 20 the prior year. So, doubles being a precursor to some power. You got to look at the levels, like you mentioned, hitting in those lower A levels. That jump to AA is probably going to be big, but I think he sits in that qualification, because I think 75 is probably the high that most people have him. And if he's sitting lower, there's a lot more upside still in play for him. The other one, this is another one of these type of guys, and he's gotten a lot of hype this past year. Demetrio Crisantis with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who I got to see most recently in a little bit of rookie ball. 7 homers, 30 stolen bases. He hit 340 with a 429 OBP. When he was out here, when I saw him, 355. Not much in that power department, but then he went to the Cal League. As a Cal League might, power output increased, stole a bunch more bases, maintained a 400 OBP at both of those levels. Incredible sense of contact. Kind of like Genoa. Like, this is another guy that, like, there was so much floor. This guy just screams of the type of player that's going to be a major leaguer. I also have questions about what his power is going to end up looking like, but he is 20 years old through the majority of this season, and he should go to high A and might touch AA. Demetrio, what do you think? Is Demetrio an underrated prospect?
I might be underrating him. I don't have him. I've had him more kind of in that 100 to 200 range. So I like the hit tool. I think it's just a hit tool driven profile. He's not that close to the big leagues. I know he stole 20 bases in 63 games at single A, but I think most places have him as like a 40, 45 grade runner. So I don't know if you disagree with that, but I'm not really factoring in steals a ton with him, just given his speed grades. But I think how much power he taps into eventually will be huge. But I would definitely bet on the hit tool working out. I just am sort of waiting to see what else I think will be there.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting assessment. I guess I don't want to take and pull apart a player where there are so many things, like in the major leagues, that change. Bases have changed, team context for aggressiveness of stolen bases, that I wouldn't dismiss. I think he's a better runner than that grade. if the power were to develop with that hit tool, you're legitimately talking about a 2020 player. I'm unsold more on the power than I am that the stolen bases are going to go away. I think a floor would be like a 10 to 15 with 25 plus stolen bases, and he could be a high order hitter if the things continue to develop. But again, I guess, maybe my qualifications on some of these is going to be closer to floor and hit tool. Like I'm going to bank more in hit tool than any like certain extreme. So Demetrio Crisantis, Genoa, who are other? Jonathan Rodriguez, Sal Stewart, Cam Collier. Some pitching market or some hitting market that we can kind of focus on from both James and I.